And as you mentioned, Israel is one of the bigger examples of organ trafficking countries that, well, not the country itself, but they have a lot of like black market organ trafficking going on, and it's an Israeli ring, and that's well known about. And I think there was something that happened in Haiti as well that was related to that. So there's a lot of money to be made, not from the person whose organs are being harvested, but from the people who are stealing the organs.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a more sinister mode of employment. There was an earthquake in Haiti, and people went there. From I don't know how to describe it, but aid organizations from different countries all went there to assist, and the Israelis went there, and I think
First, they did.
nobody would visit their aid and assistance place because they were afraid of having their organs harvested. So the Israelis packed up after a week or two and went home.
I'm not sure if nobody would visit or not, but I did hear that the Israelis were first on the scene, and there was a journalist that if you didn't know what she was doing, she's just a regular journalist, and she said, "Oh, the problem is they don't have the right resources," and she incidentally found a box of retinas, like eye retinas. She's like, what is this box of retinas doing here? And she inadvertently may have stumbled across evidence of organ trafficking, and she didn't actually realize what it was. She may or may not have been in that Israeli clinic, and I think she was. If you can Google that video on YouTube, it got like major hits during that time. And I think the president of Haiti actually came out and commented about how they're having problems with the aid organizations because there's also an underground organ trafficking ring that infiltrated into them as well.
You've heard of accounts of organ trafficking in Turkey?
Yeah, and this stories that came out about organ trafficking in Turkey that come along with death certificates and eyewitness reports were as early as 2013, even 2012. But only recently has the story reemerged. But instead of being pinned on like the black market rings in Turkey, it was pinned on ISIS because ISIS is the boogeyman of the day. As vile and barbaric as they are, they're not the only boogeyman. And it's the same story, but with ISIS added, and that's why it was allowed to go into the mainstream media. But in reality, the organ trafficking has been happening before ISIS even came into the scene.
I've just it's difficult. There's a difference between us. You've got some concern for Syria and loyalties for Syria, and you see ISIS as an enemy to your idea of a peaceful situation. But as I'm not Syrian, ISIS is presented to me as this demonic devil, that would bring the West down, for example. And it just seems like a paper-thin campaign because each and every sentence and word I hear is how terrible ISIS is, and nothing is so black and white, really. But
I mean,
I
I'm not gonna sorry, go ahead.
no, well, I'm just not going to jump on the campaign of the day, to hate whoever
Yeah.
happens to be demonized at that time.
The thing that frustrates me, like I'm not gonna defend ISIS because obviously I think that they're scum on earth and they should all be annihilated. But the thing that annoys me is that there are other groups who are equally as barbaric and vulgar as ISIS, and they just don't get as much media attention. For example, Jabhat al-Nusra, and for another example, the Zionists. The Zionist entity is very related to ISIS. It's like a mirror image, in the sense that they both wanted a state based on religion. They both assassinate and murder people for their land because they believe their religion entitles them to other people's land. And it's they both have a messianic idea that if they were to occupy this land, then the end of the world will come. So there's a lot of like mirror images between ISIS and the Zionist entity.
You know,
But of course, the media only concentrates on one boogeyman, and that annoys me.
Well, we've got a long way to go before they're going to poke holes in Zionism. But I should think a lot of ISIS in Iraq, if not the majority of it, is simply Saddam loyalists, Baathists, and all the people that have been persecuted by the American invasion, or Zionist special operations. Include those mass assassinations. Um,
I
uh,
think it's a little bit complicated. Um, I think because we have to look at where it all began. ISIS started around 2006, 2007 mainly is where it really started. And before that, there was many resistance movements that included Baathists in Iraq, in the north that were not ISIS or Al Qaeda related. They didn't even believe ISIS or Al Qaeda existed. They believed that it was like a CIA objective to try to spread sectarianism in Iraq, which I agree with that. I think that was probably the main reason for ISIS. However, I think that because of the oppression and the like treachery that they suffered from the Dawa party in Iraq that allowed the Americans to invade and destroy a lot of the cities in the north. And because of that loss of trust, you may have had people who would otherwise not um, have any affiliation or ideology that's in any way similar to ISIS, maybe start joining ISIS and be sympathetic to ISIS. However, there are still many groups in the north, Sunni groups that were fighting the occupation but now oppose ISIS. One of them, I think, is called. Sorry, just a second, let me think. Naqshbandiya.
that sounds. What do you call those people? Sufi. Sounds like a Sufi
Yeah,
sect.
they're Sufis.
Yeah. Well, look. I think there's enough circumstantial evidence to support the thesis that there are a lot of Baathists and Saddam Hussein loyalists. There's a lot of military expertise there. We saw Mosul collapse virtually instantly, and it's likely that there were generals and people in the Iraqi army that were actually sympathetic to Mosul collapsing. Um, so I think the jury's out in many cases. Um, I did just make a video, critical of Press TV and allies that are going along with a lot of these hoax videos that aren't real. And
Which ones?
well, the beheadings seem to have no validity. There's the Turkish drama where it's virtually identical, and it was filmed a year before. I would guess you've seen that.
I haven't seen the Turkish drama, but
Uh,
I have
uh,
seen
uh,
the beheading videos, and though I think that the men are probably dead, the beheadings themselves were not in fact filmed. So you can't really call it a beheading video when the beheading itself wasn't filmed.
what does it mean the men were dud?
Oh, they may
Oh, dead?
be
Are you
dead.
dead? Are you
Dead, yeah. Well,
dead? 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 Okay, I
dead,
thought you said
yeah.
dud. Well,
Maybe it's
anyway,
the accent.
no, no, we've witnessed a number of political terrorist acts, maybe before ISIS, but that were in fact hoaxes and not for real. Boston, in London, the beheading of the soldier, um, the Charlie Hebdo. You had one in Sydney, a siege, which was very dubious.
I'm not sure if I can agree with you that any of those weren't real. I think it's dangerous to just say everything is fake. I think that if we just concentrate on the evidence of who benefits, however, it could be a let it happen scenario. It doesn't necessarily have to be a complete hoax. It could be a let it happen, or it could be a random incident. So I think that we should really have enough evidence before we can say something is a hoax. Otherwise, um, it'll cast doubt on us, and it'll cast doubt on real evidence of real hoaxes, of real like things that are tangible that you can put your hand on and say this is strange. For example, September 11, why the media claimed that the hijacker's passport was found in the wreckage, but the black box flight recorder that wasn't found. I think the speed at which the passport floated down from the exploded tower after the entire thing went up in flames and somehow stayed intact even though it's made of paper. Now that is some tangible evidence of something, of the story at least, that the American public was given being a complete fraud. So I respect what you say and why you say that, Woolwich was fake, because those events like that are very useful to drum up support for wars overseas. And
That's right, by the way. That's that you hit the nail on the head. And to
but we
have all
can't
public
say for
opinion.
sure.
But Australia is bombing ISIS at this time in Iraq. So, certainly the intent was there, and they've stationed some hundreds of troops in the Gulf area with for the purposes of
They really want to. They really want
they
it.
want to fight ISIS. I mean, you have a common cause with the Australian government at this time.
Um, I'm really wary of that, because I just feel that the Australian government are fighting ISIS because the US government tells them to fight ISIS. In 2011, when the US government was telling them there were no Al Qaeda or ISIS in Syria, they just went along with that as well. So that's how much Australia's, they're in it in terms of doing what the US wants and being on board with whatever the US wants. And on the other hand, they want to maintain some stability and security at home, which actually those two things don't like intertwine, because if you're going to go out of your way to include yourself in a war, you're going to make yourself a target. So it doesn't make sense, if they want security at home, to go out of their way to join a war. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with Australia. The reason they're doing it is because the US has decided to narrative shift into fighting the terrorist threat in the Middle East, which was supposed to happen after they got the terrorists to get rid of the Syrian government. It was supposed to follow the Libyan timeline, but they weren't able to get rid of the Syrian government or the Syrian military before their timeline was up to narrative shift into fighting like ISIS. And I think that groups like either it used to be Jabhat al-Nusra and now it's ISIS, and they just need an excuse to be in the Middle East. That's all it is.
Yeah, there's a curious affiliation between Australia and Iran taking place at this time, and I think Australia is a bit of a guinea pig. Yeah, no, Iran and Australia have just come to an agreement to share intelligence on ISIS. How do you see Iran's influence in the Middle East, and what do you think Iran's game plan is? I mean, it's really hard to pin it down.
I think for Iran, it's about gaining influence and being respected by the US as a power in the region. That the US has to come to negotiate with. Um, on the other hand, I think that they're making a mistake by if they're actually trusting in any agreements, because I don't think they're going to last. I think, from the US's point of view, it would prefer to ignite sectarian tensions in the Middle East, get Saudi Arabia and Iran fighting each other, just like they got Iraq, Iran to fight each other, to get, a sort of Sunni Shia war continuing in the Middle East, weaken both sides. They want to maintain control of the Strait of Hormuz and the Suez Canal. And the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, they're happy to use these Gulf states to destroy Iran, but they would prefer Iran to be the loser because ideologically, Iran has been standing against Israel, whereas the other Gulf states have been happy to negotiate with Israel and they've been happy to have US bases in their countries, and Iran hasn't agreed to that. So there's only so far that the niceness and the negotiation between the US and Iran can go. And at the end of the day, when the US was trying to weaken Gaddafi and Assad, they were treating them very nicely. They were inviting them to dinners. There were negotiations. The US just is stalling for time because they're afraid that Iran's going to build a nuclear bomb. And if they are building a nuclear bomb, which they say they're not, they're just making like energy for power. But if they are building a nuclear bomb, they should build a nuclear bomb because that would be an answer to Israel's nuclear bombs.
Yeah, they're hard to pin down, and I think we're mostly in the dark and confused about the war aims in general in the Middle East. Um, we can get caught off guard thinking they're about resources, or my personal fetish on this subject is that it's to create refugees and mix the races. But I think only when you see things in that light actually does anything make sense. But sorry, I'm going wayward here.
People should be absorbed into a culture and a country that maybe they don't want to be a part of, but they only have to be a part of, if you know what I mean. I
Well,
mean,
once you've been terrorized and lost limbs or family members, I don't know how choosy you are about where you're going.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And I'm saying this as an immigrant, but even myself as an immigrant, we're immigrants for socioeconomic reasons, for work basically, and for education purposes. And it's not easy. It's not you always are a bit lost being an immigrant. So
well, you're in a land of immigrants. I mean, if the mind boggles if you try to get down to the indigenous people. I mean, that's just an unaddressed issue, particularly for the United States. I mean, Australia is probably more innocent than the U.S. But I think these are the model countries that they're trying to turn the Middle East into. The United Arab Emirates already has 85% foreigners. They don't have citizenship, but to give you an idea of the game plan.
well, the United Arab Emirates has a lot of money, and where the money is, there's work, and immigrants come. So where Europe has money, immigrants from the Middle East travel there. United Arab Emirates has
Yeah, but
money, and people from Europe travel there.
if the UAE have money, it's because they were following Western policies as
Yes,
as
exactly.
puppets. So
Yes,
it's
exactly.
chicken and egg.
Yeah.
Let,
Yes, that's right.
let me ask you, if the Syrian government's goals are the same as they were 3 or 4 years ago, or is there a change of heart? Because clearly a lot of time has passed, a lot of blood has been lost, a lot of fighting is going on. I mean, is there any initiative or compromise or reconsideration going on?
We saw a compromise when the chemical weapons were let go, but other than that, I don't see a compromise. I mean,
Oh, I know. I had to put it in place when Syria gave up the chemical weapons under threat of the U.S. Interference. I guess I mean more. Is there any talk of partitioning Syria being acceptable,
oh
or
no.
federalizing, or anything like that?
The politicians have directly addressed that and they've rejected it entirely. So there's no, at least over the table that we know of, and I wouldn't, um, there's no talk of that, and that's not even on the table. And
Okay.
I
I,
would not, they wouldn't, like, the people wouldn't allow them to, even if they wanted to, which I don't think that they do. the people wouldn't allow, the army wouldn't allow such a thing to happen.
Well, that's interesting. You bring the army in at the end because they're the power in any country, and because the average person would probably be much quicker to compromise. You know, the civilian. I'm speculating. So let's see. It just seems that the resistance has some huge backing, and their fighting continues year on year out. They took Idlib recently, which was a big turning point.
When you say resistance, who do you mean exactly?
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And if you say the party of God, you could also say, well, who do you mean? But well, the people resisting the legitimate government of Syria, ISIS, Al
So the
Nusra.
insurgency.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay, the
It's-
insurgency.
because resistance, I would reserve that term for fighting an occupation, whereas insurgency is a term for fighting a legitimate government. So
No,
that's
that's
if you look up the definition.
yep,
So
yep.
yeah, they seem to have had a huge pushback recently, and it seems that Turkey and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Qatar are acting in concerted effort to provide them with more funding and a bigger push, especially in the Aleppo region. And it's just goes to show you that the war is probably going to continue for a while longer. It's not going to be a simple cut, easy cut thing because there's just so much resources behind Al Qaeda, what is basically Al Qaeda, and it's difficult to just crush immediately. I think that's why one side has to tire basically out, and the time is on the home team's side in terms of the Syrian government side because the longer they stay where they are, the more fed up the supporters of the insurgency are going to be, and they probably didn't think that the whole thing was going to take this long. Many of them have said that. So,
Well,
in
yeah, go on. It just feels like you should be somebody somewhere should be attacking the source of the problem, which is Turkey, Qatar, the Gulf states, and
yeah, if only they had that much power, I would have said maybe at the beginning of the war when they had more power in terms of the Syrian state, they could have threatened the states that are funding these terrorist groups. But at the moment, it's very difficult because they're over. They're not. I mean, they're dealing with internal problems. It's difficult to start external ones as well. So it's maybe if it was like a preemptive thing, that would have been better at the start.
so Hezbollah is a major player now in Syria. Is that correct? Comment on my part.
Um, their role has increased a lot. That's I'm not sure if it's a huge.
Um, I,
I'm not.
I imagine they're a big fighting force and that they command a lot of power and they seem very
They're a
threatening.
skilled fighting force. That's for sure. I mean, I don't know if the numbers are large, but the skill is there.
And I mean, because there are people that speculate that Hezbollah might go to Yemen. You know, that there's a Hezbollah presence in Iraq as well. I mean, it's
I'm not sure about a Hezbollah presence in Iraq. I know that there's an Iraqi faction that has the name Hezbollah, but that is not Hezbollah itself.
okay.
Yeah,
And
but usually Nasrallah would announce something like that.
he seems very open and honest.
Yeah.
But he's also stated that he will stand by the Yemeni people, the Houthis, I presume he means. So, do you imagine Hezbollah could get involved in Yemen?
I it's a little bit it would be a little bit more difficult than being involved in Syria because in Syria Hezbollah's villages and towns were under direct threat from Jabhat al-Nusra, which were streaming in from the Syrian border, and the Hezbollah was is fighting mainly on the Lebanese-Syrian border, including Aleppo. Um, so there is more of a direct threat to Lebanese people and the Lebanese military. So they have, I suppose, like how do you say, a better reason to give to their people of why they would be involved because they are also under threat. But I don't see that it's an impossibility for Hezbollah to be involved in Yemen. Time will tell, but it's definitely easier to be involved in Syria than it is to be in Yemen. It's not the same. It's also like a logistic thing because of the proximity.
Some people think the Houthis can threaten Saudi Arabia's stability and integrity, and actually cause Saudi a lot of damage. Do you do you think that's the
I
case?
I think so. Because at the moment, what Saudi Arabia is doing is they're turning the Yemeni population against Saudi Arabia and pro the Houthis because they're bombing the city center of Sana'a. So there's a potential also that the Houthis can start some military attacks in Saudi Arabia itself. And Saudi Arabia has, cause to be alarmed for its own instability because it has a large number of Yemenis that live inside Saudi Arabia, as well as a lot of ISIS supporters that live inside Saudi Arabia. And unless the royal monarch family assures those ISIS supporters that it supports their brand of Islam, they're gonna have problems with it as well. So, um, yes, that's why there's potential for things to really blow up in Saudi Arabia's face.
Yes, I was just going to say it's a tinderbox. It's a dynamite with a fuse. Well, tell me, yeah, should we finish off with a prognosis from you? What's the Middle East going to look like in 2 years from now?
Um, I don't really see things very positively, unfortunately. I think that uh, the situation is maybe already what I foreseeing, which is a wider conflict between the resistance states like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and every, all the Gulf states and Turkey. So I see it like a continuation of where we're going, only it's probably going to get worse. And
Yeah,
I,
Turkey is switching sides, you could say, in many respects. Is that valid?
in terms of it being allied with Iran in some ways,
Yes, allied with Iran and Russia.
I don't think it. I think that for Turkey itself and for its people, there's a lot of reasons that they would be able to benefit from alliances with Iran and Russia. And that's why they would probably lean towards maintaining some communications between those countries. But at the end of the day, Turkey is a NATO country, and it's got a lot of NATO has a lot of influence inside Turkey, and they will force Turkey to act against its own interests if it is in the interest of NATO. So at the end of the day, I don't see that Turkey's going to just be able to switch sides that easily. Would have to be a full-blown revolution and, military personnel from the United States being kicked out of the country.
Shall we sign off there? You've been a beacon of education for bringing us up to date.
Thanks. I hope I helped, and I'm really glad to see you healthy and back to us making videos. So it's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much.